Order. I call this meeting to order. This is the Standing Committee on Community Services. I am the Honourable Susan Corkum-Greek, MLA for Lunenburg and Chair of this committee. Today we will hear from witnesses regarding the topic expanding cellular infrastructure. I would ask on a cellular note that everyone switch their phones to silent. And in case of an emergency, let us please use the Granville Street exit and walk up to the Grand Parade. I will now ask the committee members to introduce themselves for the record by stating their name and constituency, beginning directly on my left.
My name is Adigoke Emily for Clady Park West, sitting in for Emily Brad.
Hi everybody, my name is Damian Stoylov from Bedford South.
Hi everyone, my name is Diane Timmons. I'm from Victoria the Lakes and I'm the MLA for Victoria the Lakes. Thanks.
Good morning and welcome. My name's Kyle McQuarrie. I'm the MLA for Inverness.
Good morning everyone, thanks for being here. Susie Hanson, MLA for Halifax Needham.
Good morning, I'm Lena Hamid, MLA for Fairview Clayton Park.
Ian Rankin, Timberley Prospect.
Thank you all. I would also like to note the presence of Legislative Counsel Aaron Fowler and our Legislative Committee Clerk, Tamer Nusba. So once again, the topic today is expanding cellular infrastructure. We are pleased to have a number of witnesses with us to speak to and take questions on this issue. I will ask our witnesses to please introduce yourselves, and after everyone has introduced themselves, then we will allow for opening remarks. So if we can begin on this end with Executive Deputy Paul LaFleche.
Paul LaFleche, the Executive Deputy for basically infrastructure departments and the Deputy Minister for Public Works and Municipal Affairs and responsible for Build Nova Scotia.
Good morning, Dave Benoit, President and Chief Executive Officer of Build Nova Scotia.
Good morning, Jonathon Veale, Vice President, Strategic Infrastructure at Build Nova Scotia.
Good morning, Matt Boyle, Acting Executive Director of Regional Operations and Infrastructure with the Department of Emergency Management.
Thank you. I know at least one of the presenters has indicated the desire, so two of you to make opening remarks, or just the one? Okay. Would ask Deputy LaFleche to please.
Okay, thank you for the invitation to speak with the committee today. I am pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you about the cellular network access in Nova Scotia. The Cellular for Nova Scotia program is the largest investment in cellular infrastructure ever made by the Government of Nova Scotia. We know we need better connectivity. It helps us all work, learn, and travel on primary roadways. We recognize that reliable cellular service is essential for safety. It also supports economic growth and keeps people and communities connected. Build Nova Scotia leads the Cellular for Nova Scotia program and the Internet for Nova Scotia initiative. Both programs work closely with telecommunications providers to improve service to Nova Scotians. While telecommunications companies design, build, and operate the networks, Build Nova Scotia is responsible for overseeing the actual project delivery and ensuring the goals of the Nova Scotia government are met. To date, some $69.2 million has been committed to the Cellular for Nova Scotia program. Increasingly, Nova Scotians are moving away from landlines and home computers and need reliable access to cellular service. These landlines and computers are being replaced by mobile phones and tablets. The portability of this technology provides easy access to health care, the ability to work from anywhere, and opportunities for education. More importantly, it can be our only lifeline in an emergency where every second counts. We've heard from many Nova Scotians, especially in rural areas, who are frustrated by limited or declining cellular service. We share these frustrations as a government, and that's why the government is here taking action. In some cases, our ability to make changes is limited by the reality that telecommunications is a federally regulated industry. That's where we in the province advocate for Nova Scotians. In February 2024, we presented the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, CRTC, and we were the only province to present there and advocate on behalf of its citizens. Our presentation included 3 proposed regulatory changes to improve cellular and internet services for all Nova Scotians and, in fact, all Canadians. 1, recognition of internet and cellular service as an essential service by the CRTC and the Government of Canada. Prioritization of 911 calls in the telecommunications network infrastructure. And thirdly, comprehensive access to all cellular towers and locations. Subsequently, the CRTC is opening the wholesale market for fiber pricing, and we welcome that change. As part of the Cellular for Nova Scotia program, all upgraded and new provincial infrastructure will be monitored through comprehensive 10-year agreements. These agreements track network availability and performance. The work is very complex. Nova Scotia's size, population growth, rugged terrain, and rural communities make expanding coverage very challenging. In many areas, geography such as hills, dense forests, low-lying valleys, all impact signal strength, even near existing towers. In spite of these challenges, progress is being made. Since launching the program in October 2023, the Cellular for Nova Scotia program has steadily advanced through major milestones. We have awarded the first request for proposal to upgrade 27 existing locations, committed to build 27 new provincially owned locations, launched the program's website, including an interactive network map that you can find on the Build Nova Scotia website, consulted with industry and Nova Scotians, responded to the more than 250 pieces of correspondence, conducted a public survey that received more than 6,000 responses within 3 weeks. Very soon, the first upgraded towers will be connected and become operational. This represents a substantial accomplishment just 18 months after the program launched. Public Works, Build Nova Scotia, and the Department of Emergency Management continue to work with industry to make sure unserviced areas get reliable service. We are gaining momentum, and we look forward to even more progress in the coming months. With that, I will be happy, and the team will be happy to take your questions. I do want to apologize for the hair problem today. The last 3 premiers, the one on the wall, the one sitting there, and the one flying back from Saskatoon who can't hear this, all tell me to get haircuts before I come to these committees. I failed to do so, and I apologize. I also got a rather brutal head injury up here on the weekend. I have this every 2 or 3 months because I don't have any padding on top. And so I apologize for the jagged look of the top. With that, I'll turn it over to the chair.
Thank you, Deputy. I'll speak to the Minister of Public Works, see if we can't get a hard hat for the protection of Deputy LaFleche. Of course you do. We will very shortly open the floor to questions. I will remind everyone to wait until you have been acknowledged, and so that your microphone can be turned on and we can have a clean recording and a record for the record. We will start with the first round of questions with the NDP Caucus for 20 minutes, followed by the Liberals for 10 minutes, and the PC Caucus for 30 minutes. At the end of those rounds, we will look at the time that remains and divide it so that we can allow time for any closing remarks and further committee business. But we will begin with MLA Hamid. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you all again for being here. I want to start by asking how many households in the province do not have cell service, and if you could provide a breakdown of where those who are not, the breakdown of each zone regarding where those folks are.
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the question. Just before I answer that, I just would like to say that it's a very honor for me to lead Build Nova Scotia and the fantastic team, and Jonathon's part of that team, who are focused every day on delivering our projects as fast and as quickly, efficiently, and as cost-effective as possible for Nova Scotians. We work every day to make sure that we're getting the best value, and the Cellular program is a great example of that. When we launched the program, when we did the survey, when we did the studies, and those studies were conducted by a company called Farpoint, who we contracted in order to make sure that we had the right problem set. We determined that there were 20,000 unserviced civic addresses and about 1,000 or so kilometers of primary road that were unserviced. Again, the program is focused on unserviced areas. So there are areas that have, less desirable service. Those aren't within yet, but we believe that by by addressing the unserviced areas, that we will improve service right across. We, as the executive deputy had said, we launched a survey where the citizens could write into our website to tell us what their service is like. And we had over 6,000 responses in a 3-week period. And we were able to map that information with the information we had to know that we've got the right problem set. There are about 450,000 households, civic addresses in Nova Scotia. 20,000 of them are unserved. They're unserved because it's a difficult problem to solve. And we're here to help the telecos solve that problem.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Hamid.
Thank you. Is there currently a timeline for when all households will have cell service, and is the 27 plus 27 going to be sufficient to answer that question?
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you for the question. I may start and ask Mr. Veale to support with some more detail. So the way that we, I guess I'd just start by saying the way that we developed this program was based on speed, coverage, value, and transparency. And so with those kind of tenets in mind, we wanted to make sure that we could cover as much of the province as quickly as possible to get as many people access to the service, to maximize the access to the service. And so we built it into what is now 3 phases, but really they were labeled phase 1 alpha, and phase 2. And I'll just bring this up just as a quick kind of explanation so that we can more easily talk about the program throughout the next couple of hours. Phase 1 was about using infrastructure anywhere in the province that you could put equipment on. So if there was there was a tower, a steeple, whatever, whatever that could be used to get equipment on in one of our unserviced areas, let's do that. The second phase, or what kind of came out of that, was the understanding, and Mr. Boyle might elaborate on this, that, there are areas in the province that the province could use to put up towers for our own purposes and for our own strategic infrastructure that could also be used by the telco companies. And so that became phase 1 alpha, and that results in the 27 towers that the executive deputy minister had mentioned. Phase 2 then, which was already launched, an RFP has already been launched and closed, and we're evaluating, so it's an open procurement right now, but we're evaluating those, is okay, so what's left after those 2 things, and what more do we need to do in order to make sure we can try and reach, that 20,000 household number. And so with that in mind, phase 1 alpha is not enough. We knew that, and so this is why we launched RFP phase 2, and again, it's been closed, and we're now evaluating those resources. I would say that one of the things that we discovered, like we had 2 industry engagements before we developed those RFPs to make sure that we had the right information in there to make sure we had maximum bidders, and we did. So that's very good news that I think Nova Scotians should be aware of, is that, you know, we've had all the telcos very interested in this, where they are saying publicly, you know, across this country that they're reducing their capital investment. They are making the choice to invest it here in Nova Scotia because of the program that we have. And they were also very surprised at how quickly we're moving, but anyhow, the team is helping them through that. Mr. Veale, did you have anything more to add? Sorry.
Do you wish to? I recognize Mr. Veale.
The only point that I would add to what Mr. Benoit said is that through our study, we identified over 20,000 civic addresses and 1,000 kilometers of road. And you asked about progress in terms of what has been committed and how we're progressing in terms of our current work. So we have that phase 1. That phase 1 addresses 4,800 civic addresses of the 20,000 and 200 kilometers of roads. The phase 1A addresses 7,500 civic addresses and 362 kilometers of roads. So when you do that breakdown, you get to a kind of 62% of our goal in terms of civic addresses, in terms of work committed and what we are progressing towards, and about 52% or around there, I can get the exact number, around the civic of the primary roads. When we speak about primary roads, we're referring to the 100 series highways, any major trunk highway system. It's typically where most of our population centers are and where we're seeing growth, where we're seeing increasing numbers of civic addresses and where there's unserved areas in rural Nova Scotia. So that leaves the future phases component, which leaves 7,700 civic addresses and then 448 kilometers of roads. As we progress through the program, these are going to become more challenging areas to develop plans for. And as Mr. Benoit said, we're in the process of our phase 2 procurement right now, so we can't speak to what is being looked at in those areas. But the purpose of the program is to address these 20,000 plus civics and these roads, and so we want to get the maximum value in terms of the investment going forward.
Thank you. MLA Hamid.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just wondering, my question was about a timeline. So is there a timeline for when that's going to be completed?
Recognize Mr. Benoit.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, and apologies for missing that portion of the question. The timeline. So we are working with the telcos to deliver this as quickly as possible. And so for the first 27 sites, as the executive deputy, the 27 sites where they're putting equipment on the infrastructure that exists. As the executive deputy minister said, we're going to have, I think it's 4 operational this month, like in the month of June. And then between now and December, we'll have just under 20 of those sites operational. Part of that is about the availability of equipment. So we're really reliant on the telcos to make sure that they are to get the equipment, because that's the part that actually changes more frequently than the rest of the towers or the structure or anything like that. And they can only buy it because of federal government regulations. They can only buy it from certain vendors, and so those vendors only produce so much. So they get it. The one thing is, I mean, we announced that our first phase 1, is with Rogers, and so they are reprioritizing some of the equipment they may have on hand in order to again get to that, get to Nova Scotians as quickly as possible. Now, for the rest of the phases, phase 1 alpha, that actually is emergency management, so Mr. Boyle would be able to talk about the timeline there. And for phase 2, we're still kind of talking about that. But the idea here is to try and get this done as quickly as possible. What I can say, though, for phase 1 and for phase 2, it'll be longer because we have to build the towers because they don't currently exist, and we're getting into even farther and more difficult places to reach.
Mr. Boyle, is there anything you'd like to add to that? I would recognize Mr. Boyle.
Thank you, Chair. So with regard to the Phase 1A towers, we are in the process of doing rather significant land acquisition across the 27 sites. Once the land acquisition process is complete, then we have to do public consultation processes, which are a federal government requirement, but the municipalities can also set out requirements in terms of what sorts of consultations are required. So that's the process we're going through now for the 27 new sites. We're doing the land acquisition, so identifying the sites that are suitable for the towers, and then beginning those public consultation processes. A number of those consultations have now finished over the last 2 weeks, and so we are at the point where we're ready to start tendering for the towers. So we maintain a standing list of tower vendors that are capable and qualified to do that work, and we would start putting those requests for proposals out to those vendors in the coming weeks. We've actually got one that's completed already, and the rest would be starting to go out. So the timeline for those entire projects, we expect we'd have some of those towers built early in 2026, so the process will go on through summer and fall. Winter can certainly be a challenging season because many of these towers are remote, they're on mountaintops, the access becomes more challenging, especially in northern Nova Scotia and the Cape Breton Highlands. And so we'd expect to see construction on those sites progressing site by site through 2026 and early 2027. And then the results of the Phase 1A and 2 RFP that are out with the carriers right now will determine the carrier partner and the timeline. So in terms of the construction, we'd be looking at through 2026 and early 2027, and then the carrier partners will be identified through this RFP, and we'll have to speak to the timelines once that process is completed.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Hamid.
Thank you. Now, as is the case with the cost of everything, I'm sure the cost of major infrastructure projects is also going up. So is the current cellular infrastructure project still on budget, or are you seeing that the cost associated with delivering these projects is increasing?
I recognize Mr. Veale.
Just wanted to add a couple comments to my colleague as well. So we do have 58 sites committed as part of the program. Every site on our web, if you go to the buildnovascotia.ca and you look at our website, Nova Scotians can see the timeline for every site that's happening and the development timeline. What you'll see is that the vast majority of our sites will be completed by the end of next year. There's one site currently showing in terms of early 2027. It just is a bit more complexity in terms of the infrastructure location. With respect to the pricing that we're seeing in the market and how we're managing that as a corporation, currently we are on budget, on track. This sector is actually moving a bit slower than other sectors, so we're seeing more capacity in terms of tower construction availability, for example. So some components are easy to progress and accelerate. Other components are limited. So for example, for some civil works in parts of the province, say road construction and supporting infrastructure, it can take time because we're competing with other projects going on in the province. So that if we have to build a major road or we have to do a lot of site grading, that can be a bit more challenging getting a vendor in place to do the work in a, let's say, an expeditious way. The tower construction itself seems to be okay. Currently, there's a lot of uncertainty around steel and the availability of that and what that's going to look like in the market. It could kind of go different ways based on what happens with the trade environment that we're in. And our vendors source based on pricing. They are committed to meeting the pricing because we have a fixed price contract, and so they can't go above what we're asking for. They have to deliver the result that we're purchasing. And essentially, that's all I would add on that.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Hamid.
Thank you. These discussions have very important implications for public safety. If your cell phone is out of reach of a cellular network, it can't receive the province's emergency alerts. I guess this would be for Mr. Boyle. Can you speak to how folks living outside of the existing cellular networks are currently being notified of emergencies in their area? Are there standard operating procedures to ensure that the information reaches those without access to cellular network?
I recognize Mr. Boyle.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. So there's a number of ways in which the National Public Alerting System delivers emergency alerts, and cell phones are certainly one of them. And I think, as Deputy LaFleche indicated, people more and more are using those mobile devices for that connectivity. But in the areas where that's not available, there's still a number of other ways that those alerts can be delivered. So if an alert is sent as broadcast intrusive, which means that it's a sort of urgent, life-threatening alert, then in addition to the mobile phones, you'd also see those alerts going out across television stations and across broadcast radio stations. So that's using sort of all the media that might be available in those areas. And you'll also see those on websites. You'd see if you have the Weather Network app on your cell phone, you would see those alerts appearing on the Weather Network app. So there's a number of different ways that those alerts are transmitted. And certainly it's not just those in areas with no cell coverage that have that challenge, because the public alerting system, the way that it's implemented, it only sends the alerts through 4G and 5G cell signals. So we know in a lot of areas that there's citizens that are still accessing the 3G networks, especially in those rural areas, and so they're not getting those alerts either. So the public alerting system uses all of those methods, and the hope is that at least one of those would reach any of the citizens.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Hamid.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So thinking back to the hurricanes and tropical storms that we'd had over the last 5 years or so, like Dorian and Fiona, Nova Scotians experienced significant cell outage due to damage to cell towers. And those are folks that are already on the network. What steps are being taken to ensure new infrastructure being built can withstand the increasing intensity of the storms that we're getting here?
I recognize Mr. Boyle.
Thank you. So in terms of the tower infrastructure itself, the structures are built based on site-specific environmental conditions. So before the construction begins, we do look at site-specific wind and ice loading, for example, and those are not based on the typical daily wind, but they'd be based on a 50-year sort of maximum wind that you would see. So that comes from Environment Canada. And so as as storms evolve and become stronger, then we're designing to meet that strength. So that's in terms of the structures themselves. But what typically happens more often that results in the outages is kind of two factors. So one would be the power to the site. And so with all the new sites that we're deploying and that Rogers is deploying under the phase 1, all those sites are being equipped with backup generators to ensure that they do stay online, and that would not be the case with all of the existing cell sites in the province. Some would have generators and some may not. So all of these new sites will be equipped that way to ensure that the site can stay online. And then the other issue is backup power at the facilities that transmit the signals out to those sites. So whether it be a fiber or a wireless microwave link that connects between the sites and back into the larger network, we do continue to work with the carriers and encourage them to strengthen those facilities. Again, it's not under a provincial regulatory environment, it would be federal, but we do work with the carriers and encourage them to strengthen those. In terms of the province's public safety network, the province has made some investments in strengthening some of those nodes that connect the sites together to ensure that our public safety services stay online, and that will also benefit the cellular network because they do use common infrastructure. And so in that way, we do hope to make that system more resilient.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Hamid with roughly 4.5 minutes.
Thank you. So regarding the having backup for those towers, how many cell towers currently have backup generators that can handle longer power outages, and how many have battery-based backup systems that are designed for short outages?
I recognize Mr. Boyle.
So thank you for the question. That's not information that we have on hand readily because those sites are primarily owned by the cell carriers. It is something that we could investigate with the carriers and try to get a response back to you.
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you very much for the question. If I could just add, there was a bill passed in this House which talked about making sure that cell towers were resilient. That bill is making an effect in the industry. And so when we have those conversations about we've got new infrastructure, we need to make sure that there's a generator backup, we get no argument from the telco provider. So it does have a positive effect, and we're grateful for having that to be able to have that discussion.
I recognize Deputy LaFleche.
Yeah, sometimes we recognize that things are federally regulated and provinces may have little legal jurisdiction, but as CEO Benoit just indicated, it's amazing what passing a bill in the legislature can do sometimes to reinforce provincial will. So when that bill was passed, we saw a complete attitude change in the attendance at emergency management sessions when we opened the emergency centers, particularly the provincial control center in Dartmouth. We noticed a huge change in their attitude, their attendance, and their willingness to work with us. So those bills, although some people think they're not effective, they're extremely effective, even though it's hard for us to overreach our legal constitutional jurisdiction into federal areas.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Hamid.
Thank you for that. If you're able to provide an answer to that and table it with the clerk, I believe that would be great. So we do understand that having requirements for reliable backup generators would need to be made under the federal regulator, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. But does the department have a way to prioritize this in contracts that they have signed with companies like Rogers? And will the new cell infrastructure going up now and over the next few years have that backup generators?
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. To answer it shortly, yes. So all the new infrastructure that we're talking about with even the pre-existing towers, where there's new equipment going on it, there's a requirement to have a backup for that particular site. And all the ones that we're building, of course, will as well.
I recognize MLA Hamid.
Nova Scotians live and work on the coastline. For safety reasons, it's useful to have a certain degree of cellular connection out on the water. How are you taking this into account when planning the type and location of new cellular infrastructure?
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you very much for the question. Mr. Veale may want to add in a few points after I'm done to provide perhaps more context. One of the as we look across the province and we see where the gaps are, we prioritized, like with the telcos as well, in part of our RFPs, was to prioritize those areas. And some of those areas naturally also included the coastline in some of our areas that we would see the biggest sort of surge of boats and people who might need that. So this is where I said earlier that adding these networks will help improve existing situations.
Regrettably, that ends the current round of NDP questions. I would now move to the Liberal Caucus and recognize MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and perhaps I can complement the question a bit more in terms of what we're looking at for criteria when the areas are chosen for building towers. And I'm just wondering, because public safety is really paramount with any of this, is the office coordinating with Bill Nova Scotia to identify high-risk zones with poor coverage and prioritize them for that improved infrastructure? And so I guess the question really is whether it's on the water or wherever, whatever needs to be done, is there like a specified matrix in terms of where companies are bidding on in terms of ranking up higher areas that have high risk, whether that's rural or other areas that don't have reliable emergency coordination?
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the question. I guess I would just start by saying that, the whole program is prioritized on speed, coverage, and value. So we didn't prioritize the province. We actually went out and said, here's our province, here's where the gaps are. Now, what can be filled immediately? What can be filled, and then after we started to look at that more closely, we said, okay, where are the areas that we would have thought would have been bid but didn't, and this is where and gets the maximum coverage for the province. And so this is where the 27 towers were notionally placed. The specific location of those 27 towers, that'll be a discussion with the telco that's going to actually put the equipment on it to make sure we get the best value, because they are the experts in that. And so we didn't, I know there's a lot of people that ask questions about prioritization, but I would say, that we didn't really prioritize. We said, here's the whole province, now what can we do and how fast can we do it all over. And we understand that there may be, not everyone will get what they want out of the first phase, out of phase 1 alpha, but by the time we get phase 2, we fully expect to have everyone covered.
I recognize Mr. Veale.
So some of the questions are related and interconnected, and we got the answer around areas where the 20,000 civics and kind of the breakdown by zone, and it kind of relates to Honorable Rankin's question, which is that there's 4,400 civics in Western Zone, there's 8,300 in Eastern, 2,600 in Central, 4,700 in Northern Zone. And so when we go to market, we identify these areas and we identify the number of roads in those areas, and we ask the telecommunications providers to find an efficient way, efficient, cost-effective, and speedy, timely way to deliver the infrastructure. They have to consider essentially their infrastructure build-out from the perspective of building a continuous network, and so it's hard for them to just locate a tower randomly off that's away from other infrastructures. Certain providers use different technologies to connect their towers together. Some use fiber, some use wireless technology, and through line of sight. And so those towers have to be actually physically kind of in line of a site or build out a network that way. And so it depends on the provider that does the bidding. And then what we do is we're just kind of looking at that numerator, denominator around how many civics there are, how much are they asking for it to cost, and what that timeline looks like. And then that's the basic consideration. When you overlay that with the province, and our website has a really great map, and it kind of color codes what the coverage could look like across the province, and they draw the circles around those towers. You get to see that actually a lot of areas where we might have economic activity, like fisheries or offshore type activities, or inland in terms of industrial activities or agriculture, end up getting covered by virtue of, because people intend to live close to where they work in these areas anyways. And so that mapping kind of shows that you end up kind of achieving that by virtue of the way you design it. We also expect that our providers meet a standard of service as well. So you can't just have a tower and draw a circle around it, and you actually have to have a performance standard. So we have a service delivery agreement with the provider. So in terms of, we provide the support for the infrastructure, which improves the business case for delivering service in these areas, addresses, I guess, the situation that arises in the way that the sector is regulated at the federal level. The standard is that we're looking for, within those areas where we're buying service, we want to see 99% basic voice coverage. And what that means is your ability to just make a phone call like maybe you more did back 10 years ago, more often rather than texting. 95% standard definition service, and this is essentially improving the data audio quality, and maybe if you want to send a quick video over a text or iMessage. And then we have 85% HD service, and so if you're imagining you're FaceTiming your friends or colleagues, and you get to have a clear transmission of your messages. That's the level of service. And so when you draw those towers and you draw the circles around it, there's actually kind of smaller circles and bigger circles inside that, which offer different levels of service. And the final thing I would say is just those geographic considerations make a big difference too. And so the providers have to look at where they can get a tower, where we have land acquisition, where we can build a road, where there's energy, power connections and things like that. And then you end up being able to build the network. And so that kind of cascade is how you end up with the decision making. But the RFPs are really straightforward. You can also see those online. We're actually just asking around that basic coverage strategy.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it seems to me there is a lot of discretion on behalf of the providers, notwithstanding there is a competitive process and an RFP. And so I want to ask why Rogers was chosen exclusively as just the Rogers owned towers in that RFP process, but also again back to the criteria. Is it just about the quantity of homes that come off, or is there any real consideration given to where there's actual market failure? And if you could also answer if the private sector is continuing to build towers on their own, or if they're going to be completely subsidized by the Cellular for Nova Scotia program. And I guess the genesis of the question is the public funds, is it going to the private sector to build towers where they are putting a lot of discretion in their proposals? I know there is somewhat of a competitive process there, but if they're all competing to try to get to the quantity of homes, then there could be some pockets left out that aren't as, let's say, lucrative for that private sector entity. So the question is, how much is valued on the quantity, and do you try to balance that with actually really addressing that market failure? And if maybe you can explain the RFP process and why Rogers was chosen.
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the question. There's lots of pieces in there, so I'll maybe start just broadly to say that when we were looking to put together the phase one, so we have a problem. We've got gaps in the province. Why haven't the telecommunications provided that service already? It's because, from their perspective, it's not cost effective. Like, that effectively comes down. There's lots of different, different variations to say that, but effectively that's it. Okay, how can we then work with them to make sure that we're not subsidizing 100%, but that they're putting their investment in as well? One of the things that we learned was, unlike the internet project, where every time they made a connection, it could be a new customer, by providing new cellular service to an area, it doesn't necessarily mean they'll get new customers, because those customers may already have a cell phone with somebody else. So it may be that they make the investment and there's actually no new revenue that comes in, but now they've got the obligation to maintain it. So that was an interesting thing, and these are the things that we learned as we talked to the industry. So we, again, very focused on value for Nova Scotians. We said, okay, how can we make sure that we get the maximum interest in this as we go to put this out? And for phase one, the award was given to Rogers, as you had pointed out, but they weren't the only ones to bid. Their proposals were the most cost effective for the areas that were able to be served. So naturally, this is where the team said we should make they made the recommendation to go forward and award there, because that was the best value for Nova Scotians. In phase two, we have even more bidders now. And so this is why we're going through to figure out what is the best value for Nova Scotia. And in both cases, we made it very clear that in any zone, we could have one or multiple telecos providing the service in that zone. So it wasn't, we didn't bid by zones and said you can bid on one, like the western zone, and then it's yours. That's the only one. We told them right up front that we could have one or more multiple bidders, and we could.
That is time on this round of questions from the Liberal Caucus. I would now turn to the PC Caucus and recognize MLA Timmins.
Thank you so much for coming here today, and you did answer a lot of the questions and concerns that I've had, but there are still a few that I wanted to discuss today. One of them was regarding your internet survey. So you talk about civic address per se, but I'm wondering if that survey took in roadside as well. The reason why is many people in our area, and I'm assuming we're in the alpha phase because it's going to be a difficult coverage in Victoria Lakes, especially down north with the mountains and so on. A lot of them concerned about the roadside. So they were saying, well, my civic address has service, but the road I travel on does not. And specifically down in the North Shore area along that strip, that has had multiple accidents down in that area, and no cell service to be provided for assistance. So if you could just maybe explain a little bit about that survey and how it addresses those issues.
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. I'll just start very briefly because I think there's a really important point that it would be great for all Nova Scotians to know, and that is, so the federal government regulates this, as we've said a couple of times. About 3 years ago, they made a rule that the telcos could not use Chinese manufactured equipment, and that's for security reasons. The Chinese, there aren't that many companies in the world that create equipment that can be used for that purpose, and so the Chinese had the widest coverage. The other ones have narrower coverage. So on roadways in particular, and I know that there are certain roadways around the province where people have said, you know, 3 years ago I had actually great coverage, and now all of a sudden it's spotty. And so that's probably the effect that they're seeing, is that they had to replace their equipment, so now that leaves gaps. That'll take time for the telcos to figure out how they rearrange their networks to cover those gaps. As it relates to the survey, I think Mr. Veale probably would have more detailed information on that.
I recognize Mr. Veale.
We did the kind of an objective study early on in 2022, which involved collecting data and signal strength and driving around the province and identifying kind of what the network could look like, what the network looks like. We get kind of two objective truths, I guess. We get what industry tells us and the information that they provide to their regulators, and then we performed our own study, and that's where we identified a lot of these gaps where there's no service, essentially. A variety of that can be just because of the resolution or geographic nuances. And what I mean by resolution is industry data sometimes can be kind of a bit higher up in altitude than some of the information that we've been able to collect. And then after we rolled out the program to essentially improve coverage using existing infrastructure, using really any innovative means, we actually received a lot of feedback from Nova Scotians that there was sort of nuances, or maybe a particular location was a problem where a call would always be dropped when they come down a hill or something like that. And so we wanted to get better data points to kind of cross-compare. And so what we do is we use a lot of information to try and identify where there's problem areas. Sometimes it can be working with a provider, and we can go back and say, like, what's going on here? Like, why is this particular site not working? And it doesn't require any kind of provincial investment. It requires some of our team to go away and talk to Bell or Rogers, and they can adjust an antenna on their tower, and we can address a problem. And so the survey, we very quickly received 6,000 responses. Those responses were around road conditions, civic addresses, and just kind of helped us capture a different perspective to then what we were entirely seeing by like a desktop kind of study. Going forward, we're going to continue that analysis. So we have a piece of equipment that we use, and we can go and drive down certain roads, and it checks with all the carriers what the signal strength is and how it's performing. We can use that to validate what we're buying with our current contracts. We can also use that to validate areas where we intend to make an investment and find out really what's going on. And so it's an ongoing process. As we get more information, the study was from the original Farpoint study was from 2022, so more data comes in from the federal regulators, and we're able to update our information, and then over time we can continue to get a better baseline of what our current condition is. Obviously, we have to report back to government in terms of the performance of the program, in terms of meeting those service standards, and in terms of covering those civics, and so that's part of the way we are able to validate that.
Thank you. I recognize Deputy LaFleche.
Yes, I was just going to say, I see three rural MLAs here who, like myself, do a lot of traveling, would do their own surveys, not as scientific as Jonathon Veale's, but I don't have a booster in my car anymore. Mine sort of fell out the window one day, but so I just have the phone. And I can give you survey results, so anybody who wants to give us some personal survey results on, you know, where we're missing coverage, where on the 100 series highway we've dropped single for a while, and it's consistent, not a one of, but, you know, I see Kyle, MLA Kyle McQuarrie over here, and Diane Timmins. I think you probably take much the same road in every time, and you would probably be able to confer on the drop singles as would you and I, right? So that's good information for us, and we will definitely feed that in to the system. So it's not just science, we also have, you know, some data coming in from our MLAs, if that's good.
The chair is not supposed to editorialize. If she were allowed, she would say, careful what you ask for, Deputy. I recognize MLA Timmins.
I'd certainly be happy to have a discussion. One of my complaints about traveling into the city is I can't get enough work done because a lot of times you're on the cell phone, you're having a conversation and the cell drops, or it could be the provider, it could be the service, could be the tower. I'd like to have some of those answers, and maybe we can have a discussion further on that. I have another question regarding, actually, it would be roaming fees. So with the existing towers that we have right now, is there a partnership between providers to remove those roaming fees, and how do they roll out to the individual cell phone person that owns the cell phone? And with the provincial, maybe it's a couple of questions. The provincial side of it, when we build our towers, are we able to charge roaming fees to any cell service company to use those towers?
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the question. I guess I would just kind of go back just to clearly state that the survey did allow people to input any road experiences that they may have. So it wasn't just about civic addresses, it was about road experience as well. And because of the survey and because of those things, and the Executive Deputy mentioned it in his opening remarks, like Build has been able to facilitate a role of advocacy and engagement with the telcos in a way that other provinces are not or haven't chosen to. And for example, we're the only province that went to a CRTC hearing in order to advocate on coverage, on reliability, and on cost. Specifically as it relates to the roaming fees, so the roaming fees are actually, they're also regulated federally, and the telcos themselves institute those. And so what it does is it allows people who are, say, serviced with one provider to be on another provider's network. And for the most part, there's only one telco that doesn't allow their customers to roam. The other ones allow their customers to roam on any of their networks. As far as the provincial, and I'll try just a touch on that. So the province is actually building the tower, but the telco is putting the equipment on it. So the tower itself is there. Now we do charge, so these towers will make money for the province because we do charge what they call a co-location fee, or a fee to get access to the tower to put your equipment on it. But there's no roaming fees that the province would have because we're not providing the actual cellular service. We're providing the infrastructure that the cellular service sits on.
I recognize Mr. Veale.
I would just add, like with respect to telecom policy around roaming, our market is changing rapidly. Part of that is because we've made an investment with a vendor that's from outside of participating in our market, outside of traditionally participating in our market. They have had an interest in developing in this market. So there are now multiple carriers that deliver infrastructure in our market that has improved the competition and changed the dynamic. There is one carrier that does not roam between networks. We've advocated to that carrier and to regulators to change that policy. We think if you're using a phone in Nova Scotia, you should be able to use it on any network regardless. So we advocate to the regulators. We work within our means to change that policy, and that's probably all I can say on that topic.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Timmins.
Thank you. in my other hat, years ago, I worked with the networks when they started dial-up north of Smoky. So I've been involved in community development for some time in that area. So I'm happy to see the changes that happened since actually 2095 is when I started, and the fiber network as well. And first was DSL, of course, which is obsolete, but the fiber network has advanced, and how is that going to be added value to the cell service as well? Is there a partnership between that? Is this going to help with the cell service installation and so on?
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you for the question. So the work that we've done on the internet has improved cellular service, has improved phone service through voice over IP or those kind of mechanisms. So in a way, in that way, internet has already improved the service. But we didn't, I mean, not everybody knows how to use that technology, and some people are uncomfortable with it. So it's not something that we said, oh, well, we've done that, so those folks are good. We're looking sort of as if the cellular, like from a cellular perspective, if it doesn't exist there, then we need to see if we can get it there. That's the kind of approach. So, but the internet project, we started last year in 2024 with over 10,500 civic addresses to connect, and we're well down to less than 500 now. And so, that'll be wrapping up. And again, we hope that people take advantage of it. I mean, we put it in the area, but they've got to still connect. And of course, there are some places that, and I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention this, there are some places that won't be able to get a fiber solution. So the satellite rebate program is still available for those individuals. They don't need to live without it. They can apply to the province, and they can get the installation costs covered up to $1,000.
I recognize MLA Macquarie.
Thank you. It seems we've forgotten the first issue of the meeting, and I just want to say that I vehemently disagree with MLA Rankin, and I support Executive Deputy Minister LaFleche. I think his hair is quite stylish today. With respect to my experience before I was elected, and now especially after, and just as you mentioned, the pockets of poor service, and I'll often tell someone when I'm speaking on my hands-free while I'm driving, I'm going down a hill. The call won't disconnect. I said, wait till I get to the top of the next hill. And so it's very difficult. Yeah. There is a stretch, though, from Harbourview to Long Point, and it goes through Judic, and it's a small community, and there's no service there. We've all asked the question, I think, about the selection criteria for the location of the towers, all in the context of successful locations. Can you just kind of frame the selection criteria in the context of a place like Judic who did not get a cell tower?
I recognize Mr. Veale.
I was quickly trying to look to see where we're making investments in different parts. In your part of the province, there's a very active group that's been really, I guess, critical to raising the profile of this issue, and has also helped us understand what some of the challenges are on Cape Breton. I guess as far as the investments go, I would say that there are some investments going into Inverness in general in terms of an existing upgrade and a co-location. It's not at Judic, like you mentioned, but we do have, so there's two. There's an existing upgrade and a new TMR2 tower, one at Marble Mountain and one at, my eyes are betraying me here, Killardy, and a third at Pleasant Bay in terms of a new build. So my colleague can speak to some of the TMR upgrades here. But I guess I just say, keep in mind we have a subsequent round coming in terms of the project, and we have to build a network out in that kind of continuous way. Some providers are better positioned for that. Some providers are making investments in different parts of the country because they want to develop their market. So in order for us to grow, we kind of have to do this in multi-phase, multi-year over time by building new infrastructure. As that is connected, then further out we can build more infrastructure. So we recognize there's lots of areas of the province that we didn't hit. I think I mentioned earlier on that we were actually only committed to 62% right now with the first 1A and 1 Alpha. And so now we're in the process of working out the details for that remaining part. So those civic addresses are still on the radar, so to speak, in terms of what needs to be addressed. Those are still priorities for us. And I think we hope to share more once that kind of subsequent round comes out. The last thing I would say is that the province has done this on its own. The funding has come from this House and Nova Scotians. And so the federal government has not made any investment in this at all. And there's large parts of the province, certainly in your area, where they're federally kind of lands in terms of parks and things like that, where we haven't seen those investments come forward. And we're always prepared to partner with anybody. And we are always working with the federal government in terms of what might be available to get support to further expand the program.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Macquarie.
Okay, thank you. So when I meet with them on Thursday, I can tell them that the selection process was fair and considered so many factors, and that we're still considering them, and there's more to come. Thank you. You mentioned TMR. Can you explain how, I know emergency management is especially a large-scale user of TMR. Can you explain how we use TMR, both emergency management and maybe other uses, please?
I recognize Mr. Boyle.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So the trunk mobile radio system is fairly unique in North America because it's a public safety and public works radio system that actually integrates users across all 3 levels of government within Nova Scotia, and then subsequently connects to all of our Atlantic partners. So New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador have all integrated into that radio system, which began in Nova Scotia. And so that system is a little bit different than cellular. So when we think about cellular communications, we typically think about a one-to-one communications, where if I have your telephone number, then I can dial you and we can talk. Versus TMR, which is a system that's based around one-to-many communications. So a dispatcher that needs to talk out to many police officers, or a firefighter on scene that needs to talk to all the other firefighters on scene. And so the TMR system is designed in that way. And it's designed as a public safety grade system that has additional resiliency in it beyond what we would typically see in a cellular network because of the public safety nature. So before many of the cell sites had generators, for example, all of the trunk mobile radio sites had generators and so on. And I mentioned earlier that the province makes additional investments in redundancy for the power that supports the fiber network that supports that network as well. So when it comes to the actual use of trunk mobile radio, the Department of Emergency Management does use it for our own coordination, and we also use it to communicate with our partners in public safety, so be it natural resources when there's a wildfire going on, transportation, public works during major winter storms and so on. But primarily it's those public safety and public works users that use that network. So in Nova Scotia we have 14,000 radios that are part of trunk mobile radio, which equates to many more users than radios, because of course radios are shared amongst an agency. And those agencies use the radios for virtually all of their coordination across the province, both on a day-to-day basis, so the movement of ambulances, law enforcement, and so on, but also lots of public works, transit, utilities, those sorts of groups would use that system for their day-to-day coordination across the province.
I recognize MLA Macquarie.
Thank you. Could you comment on the, I guess maybe the cost effectiveness of the new towers? They have trunk mobile radio and cell on the same tower. Is that a good cost savings for us, or is it a big help to expand the TMR network? Is that?
I recognize Mr. Boyle.
Thank you. So there is obviously a synergy there because in many cases it takes a business case to develop a tower in a rural area. So I would say that where this infrastructure doesn't exist, be it cellular infrastructure or TMR infrastructure, and there's needs for service, certainly the upfront cost to develop the infrastructure that can deliver that service is quite significant. And so when we're able to bring sort of multiple users together, being the needs of trunk mobile radio and cellular, that certainly helps to justify the value of building that infrastructure, and it becomes strategic infrastructure for the province. And so when we were working through the design of the Phase 1A of the cell program, we did look at where there was alignment between the needs of trunk mobile radio and the cellular program. So we know just like cellular, trunk mobile radio also has coverage gaps. There's no system that can provide truly 100% coverage in all the areas, and so we've kept record of some of those coverage gaps over time and worked to improve them. When this initiative came along, we looked at where there would be alignment between some of the largest clusters of unserved cellular clients and the needs of trunk mobile radio, and we did pair those two things together. So it presented an opportunity for the Department of Emergency Management to make enhancements that the clients had been asking for some time and take advantage of that partnership with the carriers. And then beyond that, once that strategic infrastructure is built, the province also makes that available, as we're required to do by the federal government, to any other players that may wish to co-locate. So oftentimes what happens is once the province has built that infrastructure in a rural area where a private entity hasn't seen the value in, then others will come along, be it rural broadband or other cellular carriers, utilities, school boards, what have you, and they'll come along and look to rent space on that tower as well.
I recognize MLA Macquarie.
Thank you. Well, I guess the best and worst thing about technology is that it's constantly changing, and for the people listening at home, maybe it's the first time they've heard about TMR. And now I'd like to ask you a question about TMR2. And yeah, 10 minutes later, we have TMR2. Can you tell me about the upgrades in the TMR2 network and how that's improving our services?
Sorry, I recognize Mr. Boyle. Keenness is a great thing.
I knew it would get me eventually. So TMR, or what we now call TMR1, was a system that was implemented in 1999-2000, and it ran until 2015. And so we actually moved to what we called TMR2, which was a forklift upgrade of an entire older analog network removed and an entire new digital network put in place in 2015. And so that's the network that we've operated on from 2015 until now. But we have just signed a new contract with Bell Mobility to extend the life of that existing network from 2025 until 2034. And with that, we are making a number of enhancements to the network. So as you say, technology evolves. And so we've looked at a number of the evolutions, and one of those would be cybersecurity. So we're making some significant cybersecurity enhancements to the network to try to keep up with the evolution in the industry. Obviously, the coverage that's being afforded through the cellular program would be another area where we're expanding. And we're also looking at the resiliency of the network. So looking at some of the fiber systems that feed the network and looking at where we can create loops so the fiber network can either operate in a loop, which means that if one side of the loop was broken, the traffic could redirect to the other side, or they can operate sort of in a single line, in which case if there's any break, then the service is lost. So we've looked at all of those pieces and made enhancements to all of those as we move into the new contract with Bell, which was just signed a few weeks ago, and so that'll be implemented. Those upgrades will be implemented over the next 9 to 12 months in that system. And so what that's really doing is making sure that the system continues to meet the needs of the first responders, which are ever increasing as we see climate change. We see more storms, we see more severe storms, we see recovery periods taking longer because of the damage. So it's making the investments that are required to make sure that that system is there to meet those needs in more areas than what it was before.
MLA Macquarie.
Okay, thank you. It's such a worthwhile project, and I have more questions, but I'd like to give my colleagues an opportunity to ask some questions, so I'd pass it on to...
I recognize MLA Stoylov.
Thank you all for this morning, by the way. You've answered the questions very well for the most part, and I appreciate that, and answered a lot of questions that I had. But I'd like to ask, just curious, for all the things we're doing in Nova Scotia now, do we know or have any numbers on how we compare with other provinces? If we look at our cell service right now, today in Nova Scotia? Where are we with, say, Ontario or BC or Manitoba? Just curious.
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the question. If individuals go to the CRTC website, they will be able to see where provinces rank in terms of coverage and see where they rank in terms of coverage across the country. That coverage, though, is reported by the service providers themselves. So that's the only caveat I put on it, is that there may be a difference of opinion, as we've discovered through our survey, between what people think they're getting and what actually is happening on the ground. So it's a really difficult question to kind of ask, because there are no easy metrics or a place where you can objectively get information outside of what the telcos provide. Having said that, I do know that we're the only province in the country that's tackling the cellular problem as a province, trying to cover all of the areas. So a lot of different places, and Ontario, I'll just use that as one example because you brought it up, different communities have banded together in order to provide cellular coverage for their area or for their region, but not necessarily right across the province. Ontario did, through their government, did go through an exercise just recently where they were selling off different areas of the province to create communications and improve cellular access, but that project is just kicked off. So it's probably not fair to look at it and to draw any conclusions from that. Certainly, we've had interest. Like, I've had phone calls from different provinces, I won't say which ones, about what we're doing here and how it is that we've been able to attract interest in our program. And without giving away too many of our secrets before we get our project done, we've been able to give them some guidance to help them as well. Because it isn't just like, improving cellular coverage in Nova Scotia improves cellular coverage in Canada as well, and so I understand that, but I want to make sure that we get our work done. and happy to share the lessons when we're there.
I recognize MLA Stoylov with about a minute and a half left in this portion.
Thank you. Given that we are now all out on an economic blitz to try to get more business from around the globe, given that our growth is small entrepreneurs from rural areas, and all the work we're doing and the money we're spending, do we have any idea, like, what would the economic positive be moving down the road when this is all said and done, in terms of the economic activity that we're perhaps leaving on the table by not having proper service in rural areas? Have we done any work on that?
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. In terms of a actual financial figure, I wouldn't have that with me right now. We might be able to, I think we've got something about the investment we're making and how much that is generating in investment on the other side, like from the telcos. I think we could probably do that. I think, though, the question is more about the believability that if you come here, you can actually have access in order to do that. And we're changing that narrative slowly. And we'll change it. I hope, encounters like this and the opportunity for Nova Scotians to hear that this program is not just up and running, but it's up and delivering, will change people's opinion. I'll use just a quick example. When I first took over, when I was first appointed as the Chief Executive Officer of Build.
That is time on this session. Apologies to Mr. Benoit when you said a quick example, and I thought it's going to have to be 2 seconds quick. But looking at the remaining time, we will have an opportunity for all caucuses to ask additional questions at 7 minutes, 7 minutes, and 14 minutes. Beginning with the NDP, I would recognize MLA Hamid.
Thank you. I just have one question before I pass it on to my colleague. I believe it was you, Mr. Benoit, you had mentioned that there's a cell provider that does not allow roaming on other towers. Could you identify who that is, and also what that means in terms of trying to... Sorry. Can I keep going? Yeah? Okay.
Sorry, are you asking to repeat the question? If you could repeat the question, please, MLA.
Thank you. So again, it was mentioned that there's a provider that doesn't allow roaming on other towers or through other networks. So can you clarify who that is, and what does that mean for, in terms of the project trying to increase cellular coverage for all Nova Scotians in terms of emergencies? What does that mean to Nova Scotians that have service with that provider?
I recognize Deputy LaFleche, or he would like a moment. I recognize Mr. Benoit, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. So the company is Bell. That's publicly known, but the rationale for it, you'll need, you'd have to go ask them exactly their rationale. You should know that within this environment, and that the federally regulated, again, goes back to CRTC, is that they're in discussions about that all of the time. And but it is a policy decision that Bell has.
I recognize MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about, costs, because we talked about value earlier. How much was paid to Rogers for the delivery of cellular infrastructure projects in the last fiscal year, and how much will they receive this year?
I recognize Mr. Veale, please.
Okay, I'd have to get you the precise figure for the current fiscal year. I believe it was around 7 million, between 7 and 8 million. The total contract value is 18.6 million. And so it shows roughly that we're kind of making progress on it. A lot of what they purchased in the last year, it's based on claims. And so they have to provide us with they can submit an invoice essentially. It's a cost recovery program. We pay for a percentage of the overall cost. We look at those invoices on a quarterly basis. We have the ability to audit those as well. And so far, they've met exactly their spending schedule for the last year, and we anticipate that they'll also do that this year. What they typically purchase with that is everything, if it's a site, in terms of site improvements, if we have a need for generators or backup power, for example, it would cover that. Any kind of ancillary infrastructure, so there's sort of a building located at a tower site where they put their equipment in, and then it goes up the tower, as well as the antennas that actually go on top of the towers. So any of those components could be costs associated with it. There's some service level costs around if there's a need to do geotechnical studies or structural studies or engineering type work. That also is captured in that.
MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that. I'm just, and I might have missed this in the answer just now, but how much does the province receive annually from the telecoms who operate through the infrastructure? Because I know we provide the infrastructure and they give the service. How much do we as a province receive annually from that?
I recognize Mr. Boyle.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So in terms of the cost recoveries against the infrastructure that we own, we'd be in the range of about $750,000 a year in recoveries. That would not just be from cellular providers, though. That would be across all sectors. So that's utilities, municipal providers. Some would certainly be cellular, rural internet, other commercial uses, and so on.
I recognize Mr. Veale.
Just to answer your question, I said between 7 and 8 million. It's 7.9 million. So I guess that's inside the threat numbers I gave you. Thank you.
I recognize MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that. I appreciate it. So I will be looking further on your website just because I'm really intrigued about the maps and what the coverage looks like and all these pieces. But we did notice that Rogers is delivering quite a few of the new cellular projects. And so, but there are currently 27 cellular projects listed on the Build Nova Scotia website that do not have a provider. And I know that there was some talk about, you know, projects out there and you're waiting to hear back. So where's the government at in terms of assigning providers for these projects as of now?
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. If you recall, when we went to phase 2, we said there were 3 things that we asked in phase 2 with the RFP. We said, is there any places that we missed in terms of infrastructure that exists? We can still pick it up on that side. The province is going to build up to 27 towers. Who's going to put equipment on those towers? And then the third piece was what remaining gaps exist and what towers would the industry build in order to fill those gaps. And so that was all part of the phase 2 RFP, and that's what's still open, and we're still going through those submissions and discussion with the bidders in order to continue to progress and get to a place where we can award.
MLA Hanson, you have 14 seconds and counting.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it is not a question. I have to say that I want to thank the presenters for giving us this information. I've been a part of a number of committees, and I haven't had this much, so I appreciate that. Thank you so
very much. That ends the time for the NDP. Moving to the Liberal Caucus with 7 minutes, I recognize MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And relative to future planning, I'm just wondering what our knowledge base is on the data of the existing towers across the province, the privately owned ones, and just seeing that they're being overtaxed as we have growth in the province. And the question is, what is the efficacy of our knowledge in terms of the utilization of existing towers?
Okay, I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the question. There is a little bit of confusion in terms of what you mean by utilization, but what I can say is that on our website, we have mapped every tower that exists in the province. So anybody can go to our website and say, what's that tower that's over the hill by my house? Zoom in and be able to say, oh, that person owns it.
Recognize MLA Rankin.
Okay, so there's a lot of Nova Scotians that used to have good cell service and either don't or they have much less service. So what is our knowledge, given that we're the central body that's planning out where we're building new towers and where this is going? So presumably when we're looking at evaluating new projects and enhancing services to Nova Scotians, we have a very keen idea of what when I say utilization, what towers are being maxed out, what towers need to be upgraded. So what's our knowledge base in terms of what our utilization looks like in our existing infrastructure that delivers this service?
I recognize Mr. Veale.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a really great question, and we haven't touched on this issue yet, which is essentially the capacity of all of the infrastructure that we have. And so we had mentioned that there's the 450,000 civic addresses in the province. Those include businesses. They could be, in some cases, a recreational cottage that has a civic address. It could be your home. That number has been increasing. The data that we have is dated. It's from 2002, and some of that is from the year prior. And so the net number, we're relying on our geospatial information around the number of civic addresses that we have. The reason why I'm talking about civic addresses is because we have seen that kind of population growth, and that essentially is just like stormwater infrastructure or any other kind of infrastructure. There's a data pipeline. That data pipeline is essentially built to a certain capacity. As we get more demand on that that pipeline, the service performance can degrade at some point, which is what the member is experiencing and describing. We don't have information about the pipeline size on every tower across the province. Some of the providers, it is quite market sensitive for the providers to share that information about where they might be taxed for demand or capacity, essentially, because that could impact their ability to sell more service plans to Canadians and to Nova Scotians. So there's limited knowledge that we have. There's limited knowledge available about that, other than you see that degradation of performance. That degradation can be driven by sort of two things. It can, or well, many things, but at least two that we know of that are quite recent and common. The one was changing the network gear out from Huawei and ZTE into other products that are available from Western providers. So that's one big factor. And then the other is just that demand growth in our economy in terms of people using more data and kind of filling that pipeline out. How do we manage that in terms of our program with our investment is that we do have those service standards. And so when we're paying for an investment and when the province is involved, we have that service delivery agreement, and we want to see and we want to validate, and we have the ability to audit and test the performance of these sites to make sure that they are meeting the service delivery in terms of that basic data, regular data, and high definition data.
I recognized MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think the more we can get better knowledge on that, the better, more effective contracts we're going to be able to do in terms of enhancing existing infrastructure. And to the same point, the figure of 20,000, I would venture to say that that's not a static number, that's evolving and that could be growing. And so we're trying to catch up with those 20,000. Meanwhile, we have new developments and things of that nature. So and some that have lost their coverage or lost quality of coverage. So when there's new planning happening for new communities, is Build Nova Scotia involved in the pre-planning? We have special planning areas that's going to add hundreds of thousands of new civic units in short term. So just wondering what's your involvement in that planning?
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. So Build Nova Scotia is one of the instruments of implementing strategic infrastructure. So what does that mean? That means that we actually were tasked to build what the client departments, much like PW, what the client departments need in order to deliver their services. And so we are, as people identify potential projects, they talk with the executive deputy in order to figure out who's the best suited to sit down and to understand exactly what is needed, and then help shape that project into what actually gets delivered. Just on your previous question, we also like to know where those areas are. We had the survey of 6,000, so we had citizens tell us our service sucks, and then we look and we look online and say, okay, that's strange, it shouldn't. So we have an opportunity to engage there. And I think Mr. Veale said that the survey was done in 2002, but he meant 2022. Just to make that clarification.
I recognize MLA Rankin.
So is the private sector still building towers on their own? I asked that earlier, I didn't get an answer.
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the question, but the short answer is yes. And part of phase 2, you'll see that as we get through those bids.
I recognize MLA Rankin.
I guess I'll just add my voice to adding Judic to the queue of the list that need service. I'll support my colleague in that any day.
Thank you. We'll now move to the PC caucus, and I would recognize MLA Fadari.
I was hoping you would call Brad. Well, I want to say thank you for being here. I think it's obvious that we as a government or as Nova Scotians are hearing today that we're making great strides in the right direction. We might not be where we want to be yet, but we definitely are not where we were a few years back. While we as a government continue to make significant investment in expanding cellular services, I would like to ask if anyone could speak regarding complementary or emerging technologies like satellite-based technologies, like orbit, low orbit technology, because we've heard today that technology is evolving, right? And we're also hearing today that there's some hard-reach places, but I want to believe that there are different varieties of technologies that exist. So I would like to see if anyone is willing to speak regarding what kind of emerging technologies are out there that either we're prioritizing for the future or we're presently using as of this moment. Thank you.
I recognize Mr. Veale.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you, Chair. As you had mentioned, the technology does evolve, and it evolves, as the industry evolves and as the demand evolves from the clientele. And so it is actually part of the reason why we want the telcos to own that equipment, to be able to make that investment and to have to manage that constant evolution. And so this is part of the reason why we developed the partnership in the way that we did. One of the other things, one of the other added benefits of being involved in the project is that we've come to understand the industry very closely, and so we keep account and track of emerging trends that you may read about in the paper, but we also are able to get the details because we've got those trusted relationships, and they're able to share that information with us. As far as the, probably the most topical one is satellite, and that is, I read in the paper, I'm sure as everyone else, the paper, online, as everyone else has, that is an emerging technology that Rogers in particular plans to have. There are only really two telcos that are heavily investing in cellular rate at this moment. Rogers is one of them. They assure us that any network that they're creating now would be satellite enabled, even if it's not quite ready for it. So, we're comforted in the fact that, okay, as the future evolves, then the network that we're building today should be able to evolve with the future. But the one thing that they would caution, they caution me on, and I would just relate here, is that when that satellite technology finally shows up, it's not going to be what you are, what people are experiencing now. It's going to be what we experienced back in, dial-up time, or it won't be dial-up obviously, but it'll be very rudimentary is what I'm trying to get at. It will evolve over time though. So we're looking at probably, a 10-year runway before we get to something that we've got now. Don't quote me on the times because I'm not an expert, but it's probably in and about there. And it's as much about the networks and the telcos being ready as it is the citizens being ready to actually use that technology and be able to use it. So I guess on that, I don't know if any of my other colleagues have something they'd like to add, but.
I recognize Mr. Veale.
It is something that we do look at in our contracts as well. And so when we go to market with both phases or all phases of the RFP, we're asking for innovative solutions or value added in terms of ensuring that we can cover the whole province. So as Mr. Benoit mentioned, there are a few providers that are providing satellite connectivity in our market. Apple has also introduced a product for their iPhone 14s and newer, which essentially allows you in a remote environment with a line of sight up to the sky, with the right conditions, with the wind going the right way, to have a connection every 15 minutes. And so you have the ability to receive and send texts every 15 minutes. Some of you who live maybe in a more coastal or rural area may have experienced this. And if you try and text someone, it will say they're only available by satellite if you have a newer phone, and you can send them the message. So it is creating opportunities in this way, and we're seeing some potential with Apple's product around being able to communicate your location, your health, basic health information or health and emergency information via a message to emergency providers. And so again, with a 15-minute window in more of a remote rural, picture yourself in Keji with a friend who's injured or something like that. That might be be a situation where this is suitable. Unfortunately, the technology does have some disadvantages in terms of it's not going to be like Star Trek where you can just kind of call someone and have a video call and have that kind of information communicated. And that's just by virtue of the low Earth orbit satellites and the current antenna configuration on those satellites as well. And so these are just considerations that it's evolving, but these things complement each other when you think of investments in internet, investments in cellular connectivity, satellite becoming a product. These are potential solutions.
I recognize MLA Fadari.
I think what I'm hearing is that, because I want to ask you a follow-up question. I do know that on south of the border, there's obviously a company heavily invested in a satellite technology, and we've seen it being used in water zones where they don't have the opportunity to have cellular infrastructure built. So my question of just a follow-up is, are we still saying that there's a lot of reason for us to still continue to do cellular infrastructure widespread across Nova Scotia, especially if some technology like that rapidly exists? I'm just curious, or whether we should be looking for some synergy, partnership, or some collaboration or something.
I recognize Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. So I guess, yes, the short answer, is yes, that this investment that we're making today will be able to transition to whatever the future brings, because our telco providers are there to provide those updates and that, that link to that collaboration that you're talking about. In addition, a lot of the satellite models still use landlines. So some information gets beamed down and then brought across, not landlines, but well, it could be landlines. Terrestrial, thank you. Terrestrial routes in order to get to hubs, in order to get distributed to the individual user, for example. And so, from what we've talked with the telco company, that's not going to change anytime in the near future. In order to deliver this project today for Nova Scotians, then this is the best technology, and our best bet again is to partner again with folks that are looking at the future and how they integrate that and back integrate that, which of course is exactly what we're doing.
I recognize MLA Fadari.
Okay, my last question. Under the service delivery agreement, there's supposed to be a quarterly performance report. They're supposed to be over a 10-year period. I'm just wondering, could you explain how the metrics, or what kind of metrics are being used in capturing what this performance looks like, particularly around users' experience in rural areas? Are we also looking at in terms of speed? As I'm just wondering, what does that quarterly performance look like? And the ones that you probably have received to date, if you have, what has that experience been so far? Thank you.
I recognize Mr. Veale.
So there's, I guess, two phases. The quarterly performance, the quarterly results, I guess, that we're managing is more around the delivery of the project. And so during this intensive period between now and the delivery of service, we are working with the telecom providers to understand how they're progressing, what types of issues they may encounter. For example, as we experienced on the internet build out, anything from easements to rail crossings to land acquisition to a myriad of things can come up, and we proactively will step in and engage with other actors and partners, rail lines, property owners, to see if we can help resolve those issues. So that's where we get that kind of quarterly information about the project delivery. Once the project is delivered, we then enter into a different period where we're in the 10-year service delivery agreement. And what we're primarily interested in is that they're performing in the way that we expect them to perform in the agreement. Just, I'm generalizing, but it is around those basic data, basic ability to make a phone call, the high definition data, the different data performance. And what we will do is we'll assess those sites to make sure that essentially that data pipeline is not maxed out, that it's actually usable, and that they're meeting the coverage. It's not just like a tower that doesn't do anything, essentially. So that's where we're getting that information. That's not necessarily going to be a quarterly thing. It's going to be over the course of the 10-year agreement. We'll have audits. We'll do field investigations. What we do, they do have an obligation to report in certain events to us. So when they are, when the tower and the cellular infrastructure is not performing, if it's disabled or malfunctioning or a storm, they have a process that they have to work through with us to restore service. And that's basically the general, summarizing a FIC contract, essentially, how that works.
Okay.
I recognize MLA Fadare, or, okay, I recognize MLA Stoylov.
Thank you. Don't recall whether we covered this one at all, but just one last question. Could you or could anyone discuss any other ways that our cell coverage, aside from communication, could help out with, law enforcement, particularly in rural areas? Any comments on that?
I recognize Mr. Boyle.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So in terms of public safety users, I talked a little bit before about the TMR2 network, and it's primarily used for voice communications and not for data. And so many of the first responder organizations, law enforcement, and many others do rely on the commercial cell networks for data that they would access in their vehicles. So they would typically have a mobile workstation, a laptop of some sort in the vehicle. And so if we're talking about enforcement groups, they could be looking at anything from driver's license checks, criminal history, but also mapping data and so on. And so that is delivered through the commercial cellular network. And so the enhancements to the cellular network will increase the number of areas where they're able to access that data. It's also critical for other first responders. So we've seen, again, after Fiona and other events that Nova Scotia has suffered with, there's a significant demand for data, especially around mapping and task management and checking on people in their homes and so on, to be able to send and receive data from those first responders and recovery teams in the field. So these enhancements to the cellular network will make a significant difference to the first responders and the second responders, the recovery teams.
Thank you. MLA Stoylov, 24 seconds. Any other questions or brief comments? We'll declare the... I can recognize MLA Timmins with 9 seconds. 8.
So I do have an updated phone, and there is a way of
I'm sorry, MLA Timmins. I think that was a bridge too far, well-intentioned. We are reaching the end here, and we will provide in a moment an opportunity for closing remarks. I've sat here as chair and noted the enthusiasm of our witnesses jockeying among yourselves to even answer the questions, if that is not evidence of the passion that you bring to the work you're doing. Deputy LaFleche, would you like to make closing comments?
Yes, I want to thank the chair and the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. This has been very good for us. We're always trying to get word out about the program. You may have noticed that the staff, I think you mentioned it just now, Madam Chair, are extremely enthusiastic about what they do here. Mr. Veale and Mr. Boyle are real believers in what they do. They have a big team under them each, which works in different areas. Mr. Boyle's is more on the emergency management side, but it does work on all of the technology here. And I know Mr. Veale's boss is here. She's been watching him. And I have a note on my phone that Mr. Boyle's boss has been watching him on TV. So they're doing a great job, and their teams are doing a great job. They will be available if any MLA wants to sit down and discuss, individual cases of cellular issues. And of course, the team at Build Nova Scotia is also working on internet. We didn't want to raise that today, another subject, but there could also be MLA discussions on internet service. And I would encourage you to contact Mr. Benoit to arrange that. And with that, really happy to have that forum. There was a couple of questions unanswered, which we can take after if you wish. I don't think MLA Rankin got the answer to his question about the special planning areas, so I will deal with him. That great question. Deal with him later on that. And you had a last question, Madame Timmins, that we could deal with. Yes, I'll have to gotta get that haircut in. First, I have to go to the Engineers Award ceremony.
Deputy LaFleche has a property in Lunenburg County. Perhaps I could recommend a barber to get that looked after in New Germany. In any case, again, I would thank our witnesses today sincerely, and the committee will just take perhaps 2 to 3 minutes before we return to some remaining business. We can just, I think we need a minute. If we can return to our seats. MLAs, if you can please return to your seats, we will resume the meeting. Call order to please resume. We did have a number of pieces of correspondence that have arrived since our last meeting and have been distributed. They include a letter from Mr. Dan Harvey outlining poverty issues, a letter from Mr. Kevin Russell, Executive Director for Rental Housing Providers Nova Scotia, expressing some concerns of his regarding the May 6th meeting. And as well, we received a response from the Deputy Minister of the Department of Opportunities and Social Development, Mr. Craig Beaton, who responded to some requests for information from that May 6th meeting. 2 questions. In any of those cases, if there is a desire to discuss any of those pieces of correspondence, as well, I am looking to assess whether the committee agrees to post these letters to the legislative website. Seeing no hands, should we have a motion for posting them or just a general agreement? If I can just by sort of head shakes on as regards posting the letters, do we agree to posting the letters on the legislative website? Okay. Is there any desire to discuss any of the letters? Seeing none, this committee will next meet on September 2nd, which sounds like a terribly long ways away, but we know how quickly summer passes in Nova Scotia. The topic at that time will be moving toward an epidemic level response to intimate partner violence. I hope that I will see many of you over the course of the next number of months, but this meeting is now adjourned.